The world just witnessed another silent but powerful diplomatic move from New Delhi, a decision that could reshape South Asia's geopolitical chessboard. And this time, it's not about trade, not about oil, but about diplomacy in one of the world's most dangerous regions. India is quietly preparing to upgrade its mission in Kabul to a full-fledged embassy, a bold step that signals a deeper engagement with the Taliban regime. And behind this one announcement lies a story of fear, strategy, ambition, and power. When the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 2021, the world watched in chaos. Embassies were shut, foreign diplomats fled, and nations distanced themselves from a regime that returned Afghanistan to the dark shadows of extremism. Among the first to evacuate was India. For decades, India had built strong ties with the democratic government in Kabul, investing billions in infrastructure, schools, roads, and hospitals. But when the Taliban returned, those years of effort seemed lost. Yet even in retreat, India didn't close the chapter on Afghanistan. It just turned the page. Fast forward to 2025. While the United States continues to impose sanctions and most Western countries refuse to officially recognize the Taliban, India has chosen a different path, one that balances national security, economic opportunity, and regional influence. The quiet decision to upgrade its Kabul mission into a full embassy is not just a bureaucratic move, it's a calculated geopolitical signal. It says that India is ready to engage, ready to influence, and ready to lead. Inside New Delhi's South Block, diplomats have been preparing for months. Intelligence officials have been coordinating with their Afghan counterparts to ensure security, while trade envoys have been exploring new opportunities. For India, Afghanistan is not just a neighbor, it's a gateway. A gateway to Central Asia's untapped energy resources, to strategic corridors connecting Iran and Russia, and to influence in a region where China and Pakistan have been tightening their grip. Sources close to the matter reveal that the Indian government's decision was driven by multiple factors. First, counterterrorism. Since 2021, Indian intelligence agencies have tracked several terror groups operating in Afghan territory, many with links to Pakistan-based networks. The presence of Indian diplomats and security personnel on the ground is a way to monitor, negotiate, and preempt threats, not just to Indian interests, but to regional stability. Second, development diplomacy. India's investments in Afghanistan, from the Salma Dam in Herat to the Afghan parliament building in Kabul, remain symbols of goodwill among the Afghan people. Reopening the embassy signals to Afghans that India hasn't abandoned them. It's a message of trust, soft power, and continuity. Third, strategic competition. China has been expanding its footprint in Afghanistan under the Belt and Road Initiative. Beijing recently signed agreements with the Taliban on mining lithium, a critical resource for electric vehicles and modern technology. For India, standing back would mean surrendering influence to its biggest rival. Upgrading the Kabul mission means New Delhi is stepping back into the game, asserting its presence and making it clear Afghanistan will not be left entirely to Beijing and Islamabad. But this isn't a move without risks. The Taliban government remains controversial, facing accusations of human rights abuses, restrictions on women, and harboring extremist elements. Many Western nations, including the United States, have warned India to tread carefully. Yet India's policymakers understand the reality in geopolitics. Engagement often achieves more than isolation. And India's approach is not about endorsement, it's about influence. Behind the scenes, Indian officials have maintained contact with key figures in the Taliban administration. Meetings have taken place in Doha, Moscow, and even discreetly in New Delhi. The dialogue has been cautious, transactional, and heavily security-focused. India's message to the Taliban is simple. Ensure Afghan soil is not used for anti-India activities, and in return, India will support humanitarian aid, development, and trade. Interestingly, this engagement has been quietly welcomed by several regional powers. Russia, which maintains its own embassy in Kabul, has expressed support for India's re-entry. Iran, too, sees India as a stabilizing player that can counterbalance Pakistan's influence. Even some factions within the Taliban reportedly prefer India's involvement over China's, viewing India as a less intrusive partner. On the streets of Kabul, the reaction has been surprisingly warm. Many Afghans remember India's contribution, the scholarships, the medical aid, and the construction projects that transformed lives. For a population weary of war and isolation, India's return offers a glimmer of connection to the wider world. Local Afghan merchants have already begun expressing hope that renewed Indian presence could reopen trade routes and business opportunities. Economically, this move could open several new frontiers. Afghanistan's vast reserves of minerals, especially lithium, copper, and rare earth elements, are crucial for future industries. India's growing tech and manufacturing sectors are hungry for these resources. By establishing a diplomatic presence and fostering bilateral trade channels, India positions itself to secure access to these resources while keeping an eye on China's aggressive moves in the same direction. But more than trade or resources, this decision reflects a shift in India's diplomatic philosophy. Gone are the days when New Delhi waited for Western approval. Today's India, under Prime Minister Modi, acts with confidence and independence. Whether it's buying oil from Russia despite sanctions, negotiating defense deals with the US, or now engaging the Taliban, India is carving its own foreign policy path, guided by pragmatism and national interest. In Washington, this move is being watched carefully. The U.S. State Department has publicly stated that while it does not recognize the Taliban, it understands that nations have to make their own sovereign choices. Privately, however, American diplomats are said to be uneasy. They fear that India's outreach could lend the Taliban legitimacy, something the West has avoided since 2021. Yet, they also know that without India's involvement, Afghanistan risks falling completely under Chinese and Pakistani influence. For Washington, India's move is both a challenge and a relief. Meanwhile, in Islamabad, the mood is less diplomatic. Pakistan, which has long considered Afghanistan part of its strategic sphere, sees India's return as a threat. Pakistani media outlets have already begun framing the embassy upgrade as a provocative step, warning that it could destabilize the region. But Indian officials dismiss these claims, emphasizing that their engagement with Afghanistan is peaceful and focused on stability. As the embassy preparations move forward, security remains a top priority. The Indian government is coordinating with Afghan security forces to ensure protection for diplomats and facilities. Intelligence reports indicate that multiple extremist groups, including ISIS, may attempt to target foreign missions in Kabul. Indian agencies are reportedly planning layered security with advanced surveillance, local alliances, and covert operatives to safeguard personnel. Diplomatically, the reopening also signals India's readiness to take a leadership role in South Asian stability. Over the past few years, the global narrative around Afghanistan has been dominated by withdrawal and abandonment. India's re-engagement changes that story. It shows that there is still room for constructive involvement, that not all doors have closed on Afghanistan's future. In New Delhi, the decision is being described as both bold and inevitable. India cannot afford to ignore a neighbor with such significant security and economic implications. A complete disengagement would only leave a vacuum for hostile powers to fill. The return of the Indian flag to the Kabul skyline, even quietly, is a statement, a symbol of continuity, courage, and calculated diplomacy. But what comes next will determine the real impact. If India manages to navigate the complex Taliban bureaucracy, maintain security, and slowly rebuild influence among the Afghan people, this could become one of the most successful diplomatic gambits in recent history. However, a single misstep, a terror attack, a diplomatic incident, or a shift in Taliban policy could undo years of effort. The truth is, India is betting on a long game. Unlike the West, which often measures success in election cycles, India sees Afghanistan through the lens of centuries of shared history, culture, and geography. It's a region where influence cannot be imposed. It must be earned. And by returning to Kabul, India is reminding the world that its foreign policy is built on persistence, not panic. For millions of Afghans, India's presence offers something rare: hope. For regional powers, it introduces a new variable in the power equation. For the Taliban, it brings both opportunity and scrutiny. And for global watchers, it's a clear message that India's geopolitical rise is far from over. In the coming weeks, as the embassy upgrade becomes official, expect a series of behind-the-scenes negotiations. Humanitarian projects will resume, scholarships for Afghan students will reopen, and trade corridors may quietly start operating again. India's diplomatic machinery will move slowly, carefully, but with purpose. And when that Indian tricolor once again flies full mast over Kabul, it won't just mark the reopening of an embassy. It will mark the return of influence, the revival of connection, and the reaffirmation of India's place in shaping the destiny of South Asia. Because in geopolitics, silence is never weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And this right here is India's strategy at its finest: quiet, decisive, and deeply transformative.